Moving on to our next chapter, which is cell, which is a unit of life. What is cell? A human body, whether it is an animal body or it is a plant body, it is formed of complex body parts, and these complex body parts are consisting of different types of organs. These different types of organs consist of different types of tissues, and these different types of tissues are formed from a single unit which is known as a cell. Whether it is any complex body, it is always formed a single tiny unit which is known as cell. This cell is a tiny unit of life. Every organism, whether it is a complex organism, whether it is a simpler organism, it is formed of this tiny unit which is known as cell. Cell is known to be the structural and functional unit of life. It is said to be structural and functional unit of life. The reason why it is known as structural unit of life, it is that because whenever we dissect any part of animal body or plant body or any bacteria body or fungi, whatever we observe is a cellular structure. Every organism has a cellular structure. That means that it is the structural unit. This cellular structure is present in every living organism. What do you mean by functional? Every cell performs specific functions. All the metabolic functions which are performed in the body, they are performed by these cells. So that's why we call that cell is a structural and functional unit of life. All the functions for the metabolic processes are performed by this tiny unit which is known as cell. So cell is very essential. That's why we call it a fundamental unit. It is the essential part. It is the only single part that can independently exist. So that's why we call it as a fundamental unit of life. Now let us talk about some historical background of how cell was discovered. The first scientist to discover cell was Robert Hooke. Robert Hooke was the first scientist who actually observed cell. He observed cell in a cork section. He observed this cell in a cork section of a plant, and that plant was Quercus. He observed a thin section, a thin cork section of a plant which is named as Quercus, and that plant, he observed that there was some polygonal structure present throughout the section of the plant. So what this polygonal structure was just like some compartments, but provided what he observed was that these compartments were hollow from inside. They had nothing, that is, they were dead compartments. So what he observed that these were dead compartments, he named them cell because they were hollow like polygonal structure. So he named these compartments as cells. So that was how actually cell was discovered by Robert Hooke. The second scientist who observed a living cell was Anton von Leeuwenhoek. Anton von Leeuwenhoek, he actually observed a living cell which was same in the structure as observed by Robert Hooke. So he observed a living cell. Then many more scientists, many more observations were done by various other scientists. One of them was Purkinje. Purkinje and another scientist, Jordan and Purkinje, they both observed a single cytoplasm-like structure, some fluid, semi-fluid-like material which is present inside this cell. And he named this semi-fluid structure as sarcode or protoplasm. Actually, this protoplasm name was given by Purkinje, and Jordan named it as sarcode, which is a semi-fluid-like structure which is present inside the cell. Later, Robert Brown, he gave a term which is known as nucleus. Nucleus is a part of cell that we will discuss later. Now let us move on to various sizes and various shapes of cells. Before discussing various sizes and shapes of cells, let us first discuss how numerous are these cells. How many cells are present in a body? So let us talk about how numerous these cells are. That means how many cells are actually present in a body. One thing is very clear, that larger the organism, the larger are the number of cells. So larger the organism, greater will be the number of cells present in his or her body. So greater is the number of cells. So this thing is very clear that large organisms have large number of cells, small organisms have small number of cells. So this is very clear. But how numerous are these cells and how they vary from one organism to another? There are variety of organisms that are formed of only single cell. We call them single cell organisms. There are some organisms who are formed from only a single cell. So we call them single celled organisms, such as bacteria. There are various other cells, various other organisms that are formed from few celled organisms. These few celled organisms can be just like volvox or spirogyra. So these are few examples of few celled organisms. Few cell means 100 to 1000 billions of cells are present in that type of organism. 100 to 1000 billion of cells. The last category of organisms is multicellular organism, just as various plants and various animals. Multicellular organisms. Multicellular organisms like plants, animals and human, including human beings, they are formed of 1000 billion cells. They have huge number of cells, 1000 billion to billion number of cells. And that's why we call them multicellular. So it's very clear that human beings come under the category of multicellular organisms, even various plants including mango trees, apple tree or any other tree, and various other animals. They all are formed from multicellular organisms, or they are formed from multicellular structure. So now let us talk about various shapes and sizes of cells, how cells exist in various shapes and various sizes. As the number of cells vary from organism to organism, so their shapes and sizes also vary from organ to organ as well as from organism to organism. Now let us talk about various shapes of cell. The first shape that a cell can exist is cuboidal. The first shape that any cell can possess is a cuboidal shape. The second shape that a cell can possess is columnar, just like epithelial cells. This is a nucleus that I am making of a cell. So these are columnar type cells. Columnar types of cells are formed in the epithelial layers. So these are columnar cells. Various other cells like guard cells. Guard cells are actually bean shaped cells. They are formed like this. So this is a bean shaped structure, and this bean shaped structure is formed in guard cells. Guard cells are the cells which are present in the plants and they guide the opening and closing of stomata. They are involved in opening and closing of stomata. So they have a different shape, which is a bean shape, so that easily the water and oxygen, they can easily pass from this pore-like structure, opening and closing of stomata. The other shapes that a cell can possess is irregular shaped. This irregular, or basically known as amoeboid shape. This amoeboid shape is present in RBCs, which are red blood cells. Or not red blood cells, actually these are white blood cells, specifically white blood cells, because red blood cells, they have biconcave structure. Let me make a biconcave structure of red blood cells. Even the red blood cell structure varies from organism to organism. Like in human beings, this structure is like this. This is a biconcave structure. The reason for this biconcave structure is that the nucleus is absent in RBCs of human beings, and that's why it is enucleated. It is a enucleated structure. Enucleated means that it lacks nucleus, and this is the human RBC. But The RBC of frog is different because it has a prominent nucleus, and that's why it has a protrusion. There is a prominent protrusion in the center. This bulging out, the reason for this bulging out is that a prominent nucleus is present, and this is the RBC of a frog. This is the structure of RBC of a frog. So these white blood cells, they come in amoeboid shape. We also call it amoeboid or any irregular shape. And the RBC of human varies, and the RBC of frog actually also varies, because human RBC, it lacks nucleus, that's why it is biconcave in shape, and the RBC of frog, it has a prominent nucleus, and that's why it has a protrusion, or it has a bulging out in the center due to a large nucleus which is present. And this is how the shapes of cell varies from one organism to another. Few other shapes of cells are like neurons. Neurons have a different structure. Neurons are present in the brain. So these neurons, they have a different structure. This is a nucleus of any neuron, and this whole is known as its cell body, and this cell body consists of nucleus, and these are the dendrites. This complete structure is known as axon of any nucleus, and these are the terminals or axon terminals which are involved in the nerve conduction. These are axon terminals. So this is how the structure of cell varies from one organism to another, and also from one organ to another. They are organ and tissue specific cells. So now let us move on to various sizes in which a cell can exist. Since larger cells and small cells, they both exist, and they vary from one organ to another organ. In large organs, the cell's size may be large, or in small organs, the cell's size may be small. So let me tell you the smallest size of a cell which can exist. The smallest cell is that of bacteria, or basically it is PPLO, which is pneumonia-like organism. This is the smallest cell which ever exists, and its size is 0.1 micrometer. This is the smallest cell that exists, and the longest cell is of nerve cell. The longest cell is that of nerves, which is a nerve cell. It actually extends from the fingertip of an organism to its spinal cord. So you can actually examine how long this cell is. The largest cell that is ever found is that of ostrich egg. Actually, all eggs of birds have a large cell. So ostrich is one of them. Ostrich has the largest egg. So this is 7 micrometers, around 7 micrometers. So this is the largest cell which ever exists. So these are various sizes in which a cell can exist. Now let us move on to various types of cell. There are basically two types of cells. One we classify as prokaryotic, and another category of cells are eukaryotic. Prokaryotic means primitive type of cell. A cell which have a primitive nucleus is known as primitive or old nucleus. It is said to be a prokaryotic cell. But a eukaryotic cell which has a true nucleus, which possess a true nucleus, is known as a eukaryotic cell. Prokaryotic cell is like just that of bacteria, and eukaryotic cell is like that of various plants and animals. So this is the basic difference between prokaryotic cell and eukaryotic cell. Now let us make a complete diagram of what prokaryotic cell looks like and what eukaryotic cell looks like, so that we can actually easily differentiate between what parts are absent in prokaryotic cell and what parts are absent in eukaryotic cell.